So I'm going to talk about Pakistan's three major factors that happened. One was, of course, the partition in 1947. The other one was in 1970s, the Bangladesh separation. And the third one is the Afghan one. Of course, there are other displacements within Pakistan, but the border relationship is what was most important one. The influx of people coming from the west side, entering into Karachi, which is the metropolitan city, a port city, very much like Mumbai, a city of dreams where people come and work and to look for a better living standards. I'm going to read out a few notions how this whole thing came about. We started off with these major questions last year. And then from our research work, the curatorial note was Seeking Home tries to unravel the journey of the Afghan refugee in Karachi, some of whom have called Karachi home since the last 4 decades. It tries to decipher personal narratives and journeys by taking the viewer from the border to the city. It questions the idea of home as a place of familiarity, security as a form of identity that we carry within us. So this is us talking about all those major points. Resident 1 says, "Identity card, please." Came the request from the officer on the other side. He showed them the Pakistani computerized national identity card, which is, "My wife is my NIC. She's everything for me," he says. His eyes lights up as he recounts the story. Most Afghan refugees do not have a Pakistani wife to thank for such small miracles. If they do not have their registration documents in order, Pakistani authorities prohibit them from accessing a large number of public services and facilities. Many schools, hospitals, and employers go a step further and ask for a Pakistani CNIC, which is the national identity card. Refugees also cannot buy land or build houses, at least in theory, though in practice, many Afghans run businesses and own properties on Pakistani identities that have been acquired mostly by illegal means. Here we talked about, I collaborated with these 3 artists. One is a photographer, the other one is a journalist, and the third one is a filmmaker as well as a photographer. All 3 brought a very creative narrative around what the migration is all about within Karachi. These were the 2 non-profit organizations we worked closely, so create a narrative which was a creative one as well as the political one, to bring those 2 together. And also with that, we also showed short documentaries. These were the 4 ones which came out from Social Sciences Department in Karachi. So we included students, their part, to be part of this larger notion of migrant city. The opening night was all about the German perspective as well as seeking home, the Afghan narrative. And it was done in a warehouse where we all came together and talked and just showed the work. Here it's an opening night where we talked about, so just to bring statistics here to your understanding, the migrant is perhaps the central or defining figure of the 20th century. And Pakistan's population is 197 million, and Karachi's population is 14 million, out of which they say 1.3 million is the Afghan refugees. And here, through our research, what we did was that we did oral histories of few Afghan families, and we created a template where we took up each family through a decade period and kind of documented their household, their interior and exterior spaces, with their story of how living in a country like Pakistan, which becomes a transitory space. It actually is not the actual eventual space for living for a longer time. It's mostly that they come in the middle, they come from Afghanistan, stay in Karachi for some time, get their paperwork sorted, or some kind of like a transition and then either go to a foreign country. So it's a time period of like maybe 10 to 5 years that they stick around. What the Making Heimat translated into also a symposium where the non-profit as well as the journalists and students came together and sat on the table and talked about the politics of immigration within the country. And I think that hadn't taken place in a long time, apart from what the politicians gave a narrative. So here, at least the local people talked about their stories, and that all came about in a form of a symposium. So the last few images is all about the opening night and the symposium night. And it got a wide coverage in the newspapers. A lot of journalists wrote about how this has created a discourse of talking about the hidden layers of the city, where they say that they're welcoming the they're welcoming the refugees, but actually it's quite complicated and quite complex, and how the acceptance of a third world country would be for another complicated state, which has gone through a major crisis. So thank you so much. Malvi Mazhar, Karachi, seeking home. When I came last time for the workshop, it's when I discovered like understanding of what ArrivalCity means in German terminology. And from here, by brainstorming with the other members of our group as a curatorial, it was very interesting to go back and reflect how our city or country works out of what arrival really means. And Pakistan being a country who got its freedom from 1947, the first partition is where I think the terminology of home kind of being the highlighted one. But with decades of shifting within the country, one understood that there's another kind of information, which is the internal displacement. So there was internal displacement was a second idea, and the third idea was the border, the cross relationship. So that's when I thought of coming with the terminology of seeking home. So Karachi is a very dynamic city. It's a metropolitan. It's the largest city in Pakistan, which has a lot of immigrants coming in and working. So there's a lot of like cross-pollination within the country itself, and also where the borders are shared. Being a port city, there's lots of transport, like lots of financial work, as well as cross-trade stuff, which happens in the city. So it was so for me to look at the city's dynamic atmosphere and the landscape. I really wanted to reflect upon what a home means to people who come into the city for a larger dream, and for making life, and for economic reasons, for identity reasons. So that's where I thought Karachi would be an ideal city to look into the Afghan population coming into there. For me, it was very interesting to hear other curators' work and to collaborate on a larger platform of how ArrivalCity means, and to bring German story to Karachi, and then having a local chapter on seeking home, and how those two came together. The discourse of the two terminology is what we kind of countered through a symposium on the day when we curated it. I think when I was researching on the Afghan identity and displacement in Pakistan is when I realized that this is such a suppressed conversation. You only hear one-sided what government wants to relate. But when I spoke to and when I did research with my counter collaborators and my artists, is when I discovered that there's a lot of stress with the nature of citizenship, and also displacement in how the city reacts to a person who does not even carry a card. and has no identity, cannot do economic transactions with the bank because you don't have that luxury of who you are and what home really means. So I think this chapter kind of opened a really interesting debate over the table. The way I curated it was that a lot of nonprofit people came. A representative from the activist front came, and then the counter ArrivalCity, Peter and many others from Germany, like professors, came, and we all talked about the academics and the political side of what really displacement means. So Seeking Home really opened up that chapter, and it got published in a lot of newspapers, and it created a kind of a suppressed data which came out.